the objective of this class is to equip you with a framework for having a gospel dialogue in every realm of life. The gospel empowers us to love people, and growth and having gospel dialogue corresponds to growth in character and wisdom. And so I wanted to do a review. I think most of you were here last week. And so I wanted to do a review of, I'm going to leave it open for anyone, a situation where you noticed an obstacle in your ability to listen, and then how did you respond to the obstacle? It doesn't have to be a success. It can be a failure. But I wanted to leave it open if you were successful too.
I have actual limitations in hearing, and so the hearing aids, and sometimes it captures things, sometimes it doesn't. It depends if there's noise around, sometimes it can be really frustrating. And then that also, so this is generally. And then if somebody has an accent that I'm not used to listening to, whenever I can ask over it, it just really doesn't come down to the situation, so it's like an ongoing. And sometimes the mistake I make is pretending to understand what they say, and then go along, which happens a lot, and I just need to bite the bullet and ask them to repeat themselves even if it's the fifth time, or move somewhere else where I can hear better. So that's an ongoing, physical, actual problem to listen to that.
You answered the question. You noticed an obstacle in your ability to listen. You need to wear a hearing aid, but sometimes even then, you miss out on what people say. And then the way you respond at times could be to go along with what people are saying, but then you weren't actually able to process what they're saying. And that happens to people who don't wear hearing aids too. We do that as well. What's another challenging situation you faced this week where you encountered an obstacle to listening?
There's something I need to do, or something that's on my mind. I'm trying not to forget it, and so when someone's talking to me, it's really hard to listen because I feel like I have two halves of my brain.
I was on vacation with my family, and sometimes when my parents try to talk to me about something, my immediate reaction is to be grumpy. It just happens. So definitely the listening there's something that goes, and I cannot manage it very well.
Yeah. I think the thing that I realized as I was thinking about this is I have so many obstacles to listening because of all the different voices that are going on inside my head. And this week, the specific situation was I was in a place to apologize to someone, and the obstacle in my head was all the ways in which I want this person to apologize to me. And so one thing I realized is I like to be right. I like to be right. And that's a big obstacle to listen to another person. I think in this instance, because I had quite a long time to prepare an apology that because I knew what I needed to do, I think God helped me to do it. So the thing that it reminded me of is when Jesus goes to the temple. And that first night, he doesn't do anything. He just looks around. And the next day, that's when he clears the temple. And having that delay between when you need to listen to someone is very helpful to not be reactive. So I think that's an important thing. Today's goal is to listen and understand a person's heart by discerning emotions and needs. So the assumption in that goal is that you can understand a person's heart, which is their innermost thoughts, based on emotions and their needs, okay? And this is probably the most controversial lesson that I'm gonna do, but the one I'm most excited about. And so what I'd really appreciate, if you can, is if you disagree with something that I'm saying or you don't understand, please ask me. Please ask me. For some, I'm looking at West, this will be familiar to you because we've had conversations about this framework, but I would love your pushback around what I'm saying. Okay? And then I just put here, and I'll do this every week, elements of gospel dialogue. It advances by reason. It centers the death and resurrection of Jesus, invites response that we are not always a safe place, and reaffirms and rebukes any culture's values. And today's listening framework is going to probably rebuke some aspects of our culture. It's going to challenge some aspects of our culture. Okay, so the text that I have is, the purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. And so that's the theme verse for today's lesson, that we are to be men and women of understanding to draw out a person's heart. That's what listening is about. And so last week, and it's going to continue, last week we talked about the obstacles to listening, and this week we're going to talk about, so what it is. We know some things to avoid, like being able to just physically hear properly, being able to tune out baggage, for instance, or background, especially when you're dealing with family, because you have certain patterns that are that have been overlaid over years, decades. And then for me, my desire to be right, those are obstacles. But then I want to do, hey, what is it that we focus on? What is our goal? And that is to draw out a person's heart. And that is by discerning their emotions and needs. And the first way we do that is distinguishing between observations versus judgments. Okay, observations versus judgments. So listening is observing. And when we tend to evaluate things, it tends to be reactive, right? And that's what we talked about from last week. James 1, 19 through 21. It says slow to anger. The word there is orge, which means to react, slow to react. We tend to be reactive and self-focused, and to give maximum attention to another person is about observations. And so I quoted in B, I said, distinguish between observation and judgments. Our judgments should be slow and deliberate with a self-awareness of hypocrisy. So what's hypocrisy? In Matthew 7, 1 through 6, it says, do not judge lest you be judged. And it talks about, Jesus gives the parable about seeing the speck in another person's eye without acknowledging the log in ours. And his point isn't that you not judge. The point is, when you do judge someone, just make sure you see yourself. Make sure you recognize yourself. And then once you recognize yourself, you can judge the other person, okay? But the only way to successfully see yourself is to slow yourself down, okay? And then making the distinction between when you're observing or when you're evaluating. Okay, so this is also our hermeneutics principle. I talk about it all the time. I think with inductive Bible study, we observe the text before we interpret the text. It's easy to come up with interpretations. It's harder to come up with, it's harder for us often to come up with an observation. Okay, just see what it says. Okay, so we're going to do this test together. This is all from a book that I've read that was very impactful to me called Nonviolent Communication. Circle the one that's an observation. Circle the ones that correspond to an observation. There may be more than one. Okay, we're gonna do them together. So you guys had a chance to look at them. John was angry with me yesterday for no reason. Observation. Yes or no? No. Why? He made a judgment about him being angry. Is there any other judgment there? No reason. Yeah, no reason. Both of those are judgments. Yeah. If it had said instead, John told me he was angry, then you could make the observation. Or you could say, or if it said John pounded his fist on the table, that would be an observation. Okay. I'm going to go through this and then I'll talk about why it's important, if it's not clear yet. Yesterday evening, Nancy bit her nails while watching TV. Yes or no? Observation, yes or no? Yes. Okay, we all agree. Good. Sam didn't ask for my opinion during the meeting. Yes, observation. My father is a good man. Nope, evaluation. Janice works too much. No. Yeah, that's a little tougher, but it is an evaluation, okay, because it's not pointing at something observed. Henry is aggressive. Nope. Pam was first in line every day this week. Observation. My son often doesn't brush his teeth. It's a judgment. Yeah. Yeah. How often is often?
It could be you could have a quantitative measure. Often could be more often than not. Right? That could be done by simple counting.
Right, but it's not. He doesn't say counting here. There's no. If it said, my son brushes his teeth once a week.
I think it's a,
Yeah.
I think it's a judgment that you think often means something. Well, proves his point. He doesn't brush his teeth often enough. Could be a judgment.
That's still a judgment. Yeah.
Yeah,
Often's a judgment, but often's.
often could have quantitative
Okay.
value that you can measure.
I'm okay. I'm okay to disagree with you. We don't have to agree. What? Henry is aggressive? That's definitely a judgment. I consider aggressive to be an evaluation. We could spend all day picking at these, but my hope is to understand the principle, right? As much as possible, that it is good to be able to be objective, to describe what happened. And but what we're bumping into, it is very difficult to be objective. It is not easy to be objective. What we think is objective is often maybe not.
So you just said for the first one, John was angry. Is that an observation or
That's still a judgment.
judging someone was angry?
Yeah. Because I told you, what would be examples of observation without evaluation? John told me he was angry, so you have it from the person. Or John pounded his fist on the table is the example here. What was that? He flared his nostrils. John's nostrils, I mean, that is an observation. John's nostrils flared. But I mean, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so this is not easy. I'm definitely going to say this is not easy, but the principle is, and why I think this is important, is oftentimes we think we are observing, but we're actually making evaluations, right? And sorry. When we make, well, that's an evaluation. I guess I made an evaluation. I'm making evaluative statements all the time. I feel like I can't go on after that. It's possible when you make an evaluation, someone's offended by the evaluation, even though you're trying to make an observation, right? And we've all been in situations where someone has made an evaluation, someone has made what they think is an observation, and we receive it as evaluation. For instance, in my household, there are members of our household that will say, you always do X, Y, and Z. And of course, the response is, I don't always do X, Y, or Z. But we'll get into that. We'll be talking about how to hear. Yeah, please.
Someone's like actual words and their behaviors, attitudes points that they're angry. That's an observation or evaluation.
No, but you have to say what they did. Saying what they did is the observation. But just saying they're angry is not an observation. It's a judgment. It's an evaluation. We all make evaluations. It's just the question is it based on an observation?
So if you said like, oh, so-and-so said this, which points that he's angry,
Then you have both. You have the observation and then you have the evaluation. I think 9 is straightforward. Luke told me I didn't look good in yellow. Observation? Yes, it's an observation because you're quoting the person. My aunt complains when I talk with her. No, it's a judgment. Okay, it's a judgment because even complaining can be an evaluation. That's what he mentions here. He gives an example. This is Marshall Rosenberg, the author of Nonviolent Communication. My aunt called me 3 times this week, and each time talked about people who treated her in ways she didn't like. That's an observation. This is important, observations versus judgments, because we are not proficient at being objective. And part of the practice of listening is being able to describe what we observe about another person without separating that from our judgment about them. And that is a very challenging task. The second part, now we're moving on to point 2, is feelings versus judgments. So now we're still in the realm of thinking about judgments. And now we want to talk about our emotions versus judgments. Now, when we talk about the language of I feel, I'm going to talk about how we use the term I feel. In our culture today, when someone says I feel, usually they mean something that they think. Now, let me give you an example. When someone says, I feel like a failure, is that an emotion? We have differing opinions, right, about whether that constitutes an emotion. Let me give you another one. I feel you attacked me. That one seems a little more clear. I was going to say that one feels a little more clear. I think that. I think the second example is clearer. I feel you attacked me, that it's not actually dealing with an emotion. And the way we tend to use the word I feel is we attach it to a thought or an opinion rather than attach it to an emotion. And I know this sounds very nitpicky and precise, but I think this is important because emotions are, they're a really important aspect of our culture right now. And yet the way I've heard people use the I feel statement can define someone's reality. Okay? That someone's emotion defines someone's reality. And if you say I feel, and then you insert a thought, and you're not actually talking about an emotion, then your opinion then becomes the reality. And I think that's a dangerous place. I believe that's a dangerous place. And so what I'm intending to distinguish is when you use the term I feel, I want to say often. Okay. Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. Thank you. That usually when someone says I feel, and they include an opinion about themselves, there may be an emotion implicit in the thought about themselves, but they're not using an emotion word. And what I want to advocate for, and the purpose of this book, and the reason why we're talking about listening, is to identify the underlying emotion and not the thought the person has about him or herself. Okay, so for example, if someone says, I feel like a failure, what are the emotions that might accompany that? Shame. Yeah. Anger. Anger could be one, right? And so there is a richness of emotion. Underneath the statement of who we are, there is an underlying emotion. And part of the process of communicating clearly and also being able to hear people is to hear the emotion rather than to interpret the thought or the opinion about them, the person, as the underlying emotion, okay? So we want to distinguish the two. This person has a thought about him or herself, and then what is the underlying emotion? And distinguishing those two is really important because there's two things that can happen when someone says something negative about us or about themselves. We can want to judge their judgment, right? But the point is, if someone is feeling sad or angry or hurt, you don't judge the sadness, angry, or hurt. You hear the emotion. And that's why it's important to keep the two separate. There's a difference between having a thought about oneself or a thought about the other person and the emotion that goes with it. Those two are separate. And my goal, this is really, really important, my goal is to separate the two. Okay, so let's go to B. It's on the second page. How do you distinguish between a thought and a feeling? You distinguish between what we feel and what we think we are. Right? So I feel like a failure has two components. There's the sadness and there's the opinion of oneself. And those two are separate. They're not the same thing. Okay, so instead of I feel inadequate as an employee, you might say instead, I feel disappointed in myself as an employee. Okay, and you might think those are exactly the same. And yet there's a difference in that one is identifying and acknowledging an emotion as well as a thought that's connected to it.
They're like an approved list of emotions.
The book has a bunch of emotions. You know, I can give you some examples of the words in it, but I chose to give you 7. I'm giving you 7 words, and I actually think it's easier to just use the 7 than to have. So I'll give you some other ones: affectionate, alert, alive, amazed, amused, animated, appreciative. And that's just the A's, right? Those are some of those words. But I like using just these 7 that are very simple. Sad, afraid, ashamed, glad, hurt, lonely, and angry. I would even go as far to say, when I say I feel tired, I would say that's actually not an emotion. Okay, tired is something physical. But I realized I feel tired, or I have that sensation of feeling fatigued when I'm afraid. Okay, when I'm afraid of something. And so now I'm realizing when I say that I'm tired, there's actually something deeper going on. There's a fear, there's an anxiety that's happening that's causing me to feel a weight, to experience a weight. I would put disappointed with sad. Disappointed is very similar to sad because a lot of these emotion words, they're just different. They're different ranges, right? So like angry, most people don't want to admit they're angry. They'll usually say, I feel frustrated, or I feel annoyed. Those are emotions, but most people don't want to admit they're angry. Like I've had very few times where someone just goes to me and says, hey, I'm really angry. But you can you can observe different things that they're doing, but very rarely do people admit, yeah, I was really angry.
Is emptiness one of the... Then I'm thinking of like depression or something like that. That's a little bit more than like, I am sad because this thing happened.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So we're getting into the area where we could definitely debate, but the idea is we want to separate the emotion between the thought that goes with it. And I would say if you're starting out on this, just use the 7. When I think about the butterflies in the stomach feeling, I feel fear, but I also feel tired. You know what I mean? There's a fatigue that goes with it. But because whatever it is I'm going to do, I don't want to do it, right? That's a kind of fear. That's what I see. And so I think it takes a little bit of work in ourselves to start to identify things that, to distinguish between an opinion we have about ourselves or another person, and then the emotion that's accompanying it, okay? And I'm inviting you to that journey. I think that's actually a really important journey. This is the gift that this book helped me see, and I think it's extremely biblical in those terms, because as we were going to get to, the Bible is full of emotional language and emotional responsibility, meaning that we can choose to feel afraid or not afraid. And I know that flies in the face, again, of a lot of our culture, but that's actually the way the Bible talks about our emotions. It talks about in the language of choice. Okay, so let's pause here. Are we ready to do the thoughts versus feelings exercise? And I'm happy to argue about them too, because it is subjective. It's absolutely subjective. Okay, we'll let you guys get started. So circle the number for each statement verbally expressing a feeling. And again, a feeling is an emotion versus a thought about oneself or another person. All right, first, when I feel you don't love me, is there a feeling? No, there's no feeling there. It's all evaluation. There's no feeling. I mean, there's no emotion there, right? There's no explicit emotion, right? There's no explicit emotion, right? And we can imagine and interpret different emotions that would go with it. Probably not gladness, right? Probably not gladness, but we can interpret a whole range of different emotions, but you don't actually know. You have to import it, right? You have to read into it to decide what the emotion is. I'm sad that you're leaving. Yes. Yes, why? Yes, they're saying this. They said that they're sad, and then there's a reason. You have, I mean, even if it just said I'm sad, that would be enough, but it says that you're leaving, right? So there's a cause, there's a stimulus. When you don't greet me, I feel neglected. Yeah, that's a tough one. In this case, yes, this is an emotion. So neglected and lonely, I think, are very similar, and I put lonely as a possible feeling. Neglected and lonely, I think, are pretty, right there.
I feel like lonely is like an I feel. Neglected is putting blame on someone else for neglecting you.
I feel like there's a range of emotions that can fit under that. Just like I feel like you don't love me. It's not just sad. You can be saying that in anger, you can be like, ah.
No, that's what I'm saying, but that's my point, is that you have to import the emotion for I feel you don't love me, because that person's not identifying how they feel. Number 4, I'm happy that you can come. Yeah, that's an emotion. You're disgusting. No, there's not even an I feel statement there, right? You could say I feel you're disgusting. That doesn't make it an emotion. Okay. You disgust me is still not an emotion. No, it is. It is an emotion, but you're now assigning the responsibility of the emotion on the other person. You're saying, you have caused disgust in me, right?
Oh,
Also, a side
How do you
note,
say it?
question. Where does disgust fall in the 7 emotions? I'm thinking of the movie Inside Out, which I know is like not,
Disgust is kind of a fear-based, like, evolutionary speaking. Like, it's from, like, fear of, like, that dirty water is disgusting because you have, like, an infrared, like, reaction against it
Yeah.
to, like, keep you from doing it. That's why.
But you don't know.
Feeling and observation is clearly a lot.
Yeah.
Judgment.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's judgment. There's judgment. Okay, I feel like hitting you. No. I feel misunderstood. Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think it's an emotion. I feel good about what you did for me. Yeah, I think the only problem is that good is vague. Yeah, so it could be clear. 9 was, wait, hold on. I'm worthless? Yeah, I'm worthless. That's definitely not an emotion. It is a judgment. Okay, it's not an emotion. But we can import a whole bunch of emotions that go with that. All right? So let me pause. Now, we talked about why observations versus judgments are important. Why is it important to distinguish between thoughts and feelings? I just want to see what you guys think. What are some reasons why you'd want to distinguish between a thought and a feeling?
The thought you can have a different reaction to that thought than the other person. So you're not, the conversation is not going to align with
Yeah.
other things.
I think pride is the main concern. Because if you have a lot of thoughts about yourself or other people, there are underlying assumptions that are not objectively correct. You can import a lot of values from yourself or on other people that can distort what is true.
Okay, so can I, if I hear what you're saying, can I try to give an example? So if someone says that they feel like a failure, that person may feel ashamed, but I might feel sadness, and I might assume that they're sad because I'm viewing it from my own perspective of how I would feel if I had the thought that I felt like a failure. Is that one possibility?
You're not able to adequately express the true feeling. You skip to an observation about yourself that you can have, which can be undergirded by a prideful misunderstanding of yourself.
It's one of the reasons why I'm having you do this exercise is to become aware of our emotions and that they are not the same thing as the thoughts about ourselves. They can definitely be connected. So you can have a thought about oneself being a failure and then you will feel sad. But there are other times where I can speak from my own experience. I'm just in a bad mood because I didn't get enough sleep. And then I have thoughts about being a failure. Do you see how they kind of, but it started because I felt some sadness. And then a circumstance happens and then I begin to have the thought that I'm a failure because it comes out of my sadness, but it didn't, does that make sense? But they weren't exactly the same thing. The practice here that I'm doing is creating some separation, making these distinctions. And ultimately, this is all wisdom, right? Because wisdom is all about distinctions. We're trying to make distinctions. And ultimately, those distinctions are going to be helpful for us because this framework is not just this is definitely a speaking framework, but this is also most powerful as a listening framework, as a way to hear other people. And so that's the next part. That's the last part we're going to talk about. This idea of emotional responsibility. Okay, and these next 2 points are probably the most controversial. What others say and do may be the stimulus for our feelings, but they are never the cause of them. Feelings, that is emotions, result from how we choose to receive what others say, as well as our particular needs and expectations in the moment. Okay, and all this is leading to and I think this is a spiritual principle. Each person is responsible for his or her own emotions. And that means when I'm talking to someone, I'm responsible for what I feel, and the other person is responsible for what he or she feels. I cannot force that other person to feel anything, any emotion that I want, nor can the other person make me feel anything that they want. And so I already contested the language where people say, I feel, and then they insert opinion. But I also I challenge when people say, you made me feel, okay? So when someone says, we do this often, we make statements like, you made me feel sad, or you made me feel angry. If you are responsible for your own emotions, no one can make you feel anything. And so let me give you an example. And I've talked about it with both West and Sam, and I think I talked about it last week. And I'll start with the language of need. Okay, I'm going to be talking about needs here. We're going to get to needs. I have a need for attention. Okay, I have a need for attention, and I have a need for attention to be demonstrated by eye contact, by someone making eye contact with us. So Wes is looking away right now because this is kind of our inside joke. So I have a need for attention, and the way people exhibit attention to me is eye contact, right? Making eye contact with me. And both, and Sam and Wes know this because we had this conversation. And so when I've had conversations with the two of them, there will be points in our conversation where they will I'm trying to make this observation, they will have prolonged times of lack of eye contact. They will look somewhere else besides me during our conversation. And at that moment, I can say, you make me angry. You make me angry, right? Because you don't care about me, right? Did I say an emotion? I did say an emotion, but there's all kinds of evaluation in that statement, right? There's all kinds of evaluation in that statement. What I could say, and this is what their emotional ownership is about, is I feel sad and maybe frustrated when you don't make eye contact with me, because I have a need for attention, and the way I receive that is through people looking at me. And then Sam was great because he talked about his can I share this? His upbringing, and he never made eye contact with his parents. He didn't make eye contact with his parents, and that was just how he brought up. And so that's part of his need, is that when someone's talking to him, he needs the freedom to not look at the person. And so we both actually have kind of these conflicting needs when it comes, and then we had to kind of talk it out and understand our heart, right? The emotions that are associated with these needs. But part of that came from distinguishing between the two, because I had to finally realize, you know what? My frustration is nothing to do with, it's an interpretation. It's because I interpreted him in a certain way. I interpreted West in a certain way, but I didn't have to make that interpretation because that emotion came from a need that wasn't being met. Okay, now I said a lot there, but that is the premise of what emotional responsibility means, is that I'm responsible for my emotions, and those emotions come from an interpretive framework that I have. You are responsible for your emotions, others are responsible for their emotions. The Bible is full of language advocating emotional responsibility. I only picked a couple verses, right? But I think we all know there are many verses about do not be afraid. I just picked two, John 6:20, Matthew 14:26. And what I appreciate about the Bible, it actually is very clear about using emotion language. It doesn't say, do not feel that other people are bad. It doesn't say that. It says very simply, in the language of emotion, do not be afraid, as if you have the power or ability to influence your emotional state. You have the power and ability to influence. And I didn't say control, I just said influence. You have the power and ability to influence your emotional state, and you're responsible for your emotions. Now, it also says, do not worry. And that's repeatedly, right? Do not worry. And I would say worry is also a type of fear or anxiety, and you could even argue sadness, right? So there's certain things that go with worry. The Bible's also clear in Matthew, for instance, and Luke about the ability to influence that emotional state. So why is this so important? We receive negative messages every day. You receive negative messages every day. Okay, in terms of criticism, I mean, many of the statements here that you've read are negative messages. I feel you don't love me. I'm sad that you're leaving. You're disgusting, right? I feel like hitting you. These are all negative messages. And my goal in listening to someone's heart is, how do you hear the needs or emotions behind a negative message? And there are a couple options when it comes to them, okay? Here are the options. Number one, you can either blame yourself. So if someone says, and this happens all the time in marriage, like if my wife says, I feel you don't love me, one of the options that I can do is be like, oh, it's because I forgot to do such and such, right? And then I'm like, I'm never going to change. I'm never going to get better. Or I can be like, because the other option is to blame the other person, right? Oh, here she goes again. Right? I can do that. I can go there. I can blame the other person for complaining again, right? However, you have a third and fourth option, and that's to sense your own emotion and needs, right? So for instance, I could say, I feel ashamed right now. If Judy said, I feel you don't love me, I could say, hey, you know what? I feel ashamed right now because I just remembered I forgot to do that thing for you, and I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. I forgot. Okay, and of course it's tempting because, of course that may not be the best response. I can evaluate that response by saying it's not focused on the other person, but it's also honest about what I'm feeling and what my needs at that moment, right? I need assurance that it wasn't about forgetting that thing, okay? Or I could go, I feel frustrated because you've brought up that you don't feel you love me. This is the third time you've brought it up this week, and I need progress. I need to feel like we're making progress. I need a sense. Sorry, I'll just stop there. But there's an emotion statement that I can make with that in terms of how do I express if I'm feeling hurt or frustration. Okay, so again, I'm talking about ways in which we can speak, but what I want to do is now, we're almost to the exercise. Okay, let me pause right there. Any questions? Any questions about receiving a negative message? Oh, so you sense one's emotions and needs, and then you can also sense the other person's emotions and needs. And when you sense another person's emotion and needs, it's always a guess. You're always going to guess. And sometimes even in the guessing, some people are going to be offended because like I said, very few people want to admit that they're angry. Okay, so you don't say, hey, so you feel angry. but I think sometimes it's helpful. I think it's important to be able to guess at the person's emotions and then what they need. Okay, so let me talk about D. When someone gives a negative message, it often masks an unexpressed need or desire. Okay, I gave you the example of eye contact for myself. Okay, and I don't remember how those conversations went down with West and Sam, but I think it started with a negative message. I think I gave a negative message in the beginning. But it led to talking about an unexpressed need or desire. And that's what we want to get to in terms of communicating, but also where we want to get to in terms of hearing other people. Okay, you disappointed me by not coming over last night versus I was disappointed when you didn't come over because there were some things I wanted to talk about. What's the difference between those two statements? In the second statement, the person is taking responsibility for his or her emotion. They're saying, I was disappointed, rather than you disappointed me. What's another one?
The second one expresses an explicit need or desire.
Yeah. What are some reasons why this is hard to do? The second statement. Vulnerability is why this is really hard. You make yourself vulnerable. You open yourself up to being rejected by the other person. And I think even in today's text, I think about vulnerability on behalf of the religious leaders. They could have admitted that they didn't believe Jesus, but they didn't. They didn't want to appear. That would make them vulnerable. Yeah, exactly. They would have exposed themselves to shame. And we are often not explicit about our needs out of fear of vulnerability because we're opening ourselves up to being needy. And by the way, you can call this need or desire. I would recommend when you're talking about it for yourself, you talk about it as a need, your own need. But when you're talking about other people, you might express it as desire. Because typically, people don't like to be told what they need. Right? If you were to say to me, well, Fred, you need eye contact, I'd be kind of like, I don't like it when you say that way. You can just say, hey, I know you appreciate eye contact. I'll be like, oh, yeah. Right? Because it just, it feels exposing, right? When someone says, oh, yeah, I know you need eye contact, so, So I listed some needs here. And again, this is going to take, for those of you who've been in therapy, it takes work to discern and have language around emotions, just period, right? And then it takes work to then, the emotions are over here, and then you have a whole bunch of thoughts that go with that, right? And that takes a certain amount of work, right? And then to go from those thoughts and emotions to these unmet needs is a whole nother layer of work, of the Spirit working in us. And so I want to be careful, like I'm asking a lot in this, and yet being able to do this kind of work it's incredible. Like, I think that's what the Spirit of God intends for us, both as speakers, as those communicating our needs, and being able to hear other people. And so I include some needs here: autonomy, celebration, affection, appreciation, fun, touch, and rest. Okay, those are examples of needs. And we are not a culture that is very proficient in talking about some of those needs. Some of those needs, they're easy, like fun, none of us, most people don't like to talk about being needy. And so this is difficult in being vulnerable. And so let's try this exercise and circle the number for each statement acknowledging emotional responsibility. Can I just confess that as part of my journey in reading and practicing this book, I have at times, especially with Judy, become completely insufferable, like just absolutely terrible in terms of being nitpicky on other people's communication. And so I'm really learning humility. I mean, ultimately this is about character, right? Loving people, listening to people, it's about character. And listening to people is not about forcing them to fit a framework or correcting them on on whether it's a thought and a feeling. And of course, we can do that and laugh in this class because we're trying to grow and learn in that area. But I hope I hope that as a result of this, you could become more aware that when someone is expressing a negative message, there may be an unmet need that is underlying, something negative someone's saying. And that's been the most powerful thing for me, and not just in my relationship with my wife, but also with my kids. And honestly, like any relationship that I have has been improved if I practice this without telling, without telling people, where I'm just able to hear the unmet desire. Okay, so that's my hope. Let's try it. You irritate me when you leave company documents on the conference room floor. Yeah, why? Why is it no? Yes. It's blaming. Yes. Rich, were you going to say that too? Yeah, it points to the other person. Yeah, it's blaming the other person for the emotion. You irritate me. But it is specific. It does give an observation. You leave company documents on the conference room floor, so that person gets a point for that. Okay. I feel angry when you said that because I want respect and I heard your words as an insult. Yeah, I think that's emotionally responsible. Yeah. I think that's hard to say. I think that statement is a hard statement to say. Number 3, I feel frustrated when you come late. Yeah, the need part is a little bit lacking. Okay, so the way he talked about it is, I feel the additional one would have been, I feel frustrated when you come late because I was hoping we'd be able to get some front row seats. Right, that's more specific. Like now you have this context, like of being at a concert or something like that. I was hoping you'd come earlier because then we could get front row seats, right? Because there's a need being clearly communicated. Right. 4, I'm sad that you won't be coming for dinner because I was hoping we could spend the evening together. That's a very vulnerable statement because you're showing your need for that other person. I think that's a tough one. That's tough to say, but it is the emotionally responsible statement. 5, I feel disappointed because you said you would do it and didn't. Yeah, there's an observational element to it. The way to make it more expressive about needs is, I felt disappointed because I want to be able to rely upon your words. Because the idea is to make it less blamey. Right. Part of it is making it less blamey. Okay, 6. I'm discouraged because I would have liked to progress further in my work by now. Yeah. 7. Little things people say sometimes hurt me. Yeah, it's a no. Because they're blaming the people, right? They're blaming the people, and the little things is not really clear. Okay? Okay, so let's take one of these statements, right? The ones that aren't emotionally responsible. Let's take the number 1, for instance. And if you were to imagine what the unmet needs are for this person, okay, just what are some ways you would imagine? Let's say you were talking to someone and they're not being clear. They're not using emotionally responsible language, right? Like in this case, right? We're going to do this. This is the last listening exercise. How would you make a guess at their needs or emotions, given number 1? And let's say you're the one leaving the company documents on the conference room floor. You have a high level of integrity in the way that you do your job. And when I left the documents there, I didn't respect that, and you're disappointed, and you feel disappointment. And you can also link that to integrity, right? You could, again, I don't know if I'd use the word need for a need of integrity, right? You can just say, hey, you're conscientious, and you wanted to make sure the room was cleaned up before the next person. And so that work fell upon you. And then Renee could come back, if she was that person, she's like, no, it's not about tidiness. It's about their conference room documents, and there's someone else coming in, right? And so they could reframe it for you, but then now you have a better idea because you made the guess. You're like, okay, sorry, I didn't mean tidy. You're conscientious in terms of making sure company secrets don't get, whatever. And I didn't respect that, right? What's another one? Or let's do this. Does anyone have a situation in your own life where someone has made a statement and you're like, I don't know how to, well, you do know how to interpret it and it's not good, okay? But you want to interpret it differently, okay? Because this is about listening. We're listening to someone's heart. What's a situation where you want to be able to discern someone else's heart and you're having trouble doing so? I'm asking. And this will be the homework too.
This week someone was talking to me about white privilege and gatekeeping. And I was unsure if they were meaning to accuse me of these things, or if they were simply angry about them in general.
That's a great situation. Okay. Yeah, sorry, great. I mean, it's great. It's great in the sense that it has a lot of the features that we're talking about, right? And you can take it as an observation, or you can take it as an evaluation of you, right? And you're not sure which one, right? You don't know if it's an observation. Well, there's definitely a lot of evaluation there, but you're not sure if it's an evaluation of yourself or not. Okay. All right. Let's brainstorm. What do you do? If you were to identify a need or desire of that person based on your conversation, what might you say?
I have a bigger need elimination of class differences, but more personal need, access to the things she wants to do without feeling like people think she doesn't deserve them. To be able to do things, activities and things she wants to do without feeling like other people think she doesn't deserve to do them.
Okay, kind of like a need for equal opportunity. So a need, is that? No. Okay. So yeah, that's okay. But you're working on trying to identify. You're listening to her, and you're working on identifying what the needs are, and then you can have that kind of process where you're like, okay, so you value or desire justice, and you desire it in this specific way. Okay. Can I share one more? In closing, can I share one example that I've been kind of working through? So my mother-in-law, she is, how do I say this? I want to be diplomatic. When she receives a platform, she'll give advice, right? She'll give advice, unsolicited advice, and I think it irritates. I feel irritated. I feel irritated when it happens because I have a need to ask for. I have a need maybe for autonomy, and I feel like that doesn't. I sense it doesn't respect it. However, I'm able to hear her in that she has a need. She feels glad. That's my perception. When she can give advice, because that's the way she can express love to her family. So giving advice is her love language, and she has a need to love her family. And so once I was able to kind of like get to that point, like this is the way she loves people, I'm like, oh, she's loving me right now by telling me something that I didn't exactly invite. But this is her need in terms of loving someone. And so that was powerful. I felt glad that was powerful for me to be able to see that this was something she was doing on behalf of other people, not to spite them. And so my hope and prayer is that as you have relationships with people, whether it's family or friends or coworkers or spouses or partners, that you be able to identify the underlying need for that person and see that person's heart. Let me pray. Father God, thank you that your Son became incarnate. He became flesh, not only to speak to us and to embody the word, but also to listen. That you became flesh in order to listen to us, in order to walk in our shoes, to fully experience the emotional range of being human, and the needs of being human. And so, Lord, would you teach us to discern the heart, the emotions and needs of others, without demanding that they fit any kind of communication framework, but being able to distinguish between an emotion, between a thought, and between a judgment. And Lord, I pray that in doing so, you would do a work in us by your Spirit to draw closer to you and recognize the rich emotional life you have towards us, and then also be able to see the hearts of others. And then in doing so, we would humbly and vulnerably express our own emotions, and then also be able to receive others. We pray this in your name. Amen.